This week on Snark Squad Pod, we are joined by Sari Riley and Sam Schultz to discuss the Netflix animated series She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. Welcome back to Snark Squad Pod. I am your host, Nicole Sweeney, and I am joined as always by my co-host,
Marines. Hello, everyone. This week we are joined by Sari Riley and Sam Schultz.
Hello. I'm Sari. I work on Crash Course with Nicole, but on the script end of things. I'm an editorial assistant for Monstrous, and I'm on the SciShow Tangents podcast.
Also, hello. I'm Sam. I work on SciShow, and I'm also on the Tangents podcast and other podcasts, too.
You have your own podcast.
Yeah, called Real Love, where me and my girlfriend watch movies. So there's also that.
This week we are talking about She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, which is a reboot of an animated series that was on in the 80s that I'd never watched, but we will get to that. On this series, we join at the very beginning a girl named Adora, and she is an orphan who has been raised by someone called Shadow Weaver in a place called the Horde. And if all that sounds pretty evil to you, yeah. Adora's being trained as a soldier for the Horde, and they are in a long-standing war against some super-powered princesses. And one day, Adora and her BFF Catra, who is a cat, they sneak out of the Horde and they go on a little rules-breaking adventure. And Adora finds a mystical magical sword that calls out to her, and we eventually learn this sword turns her into She-Ra. She's super confused because, like newfound powers, but also it turns out that princesses aren't so bad, probably partially because she is one, and also the Horde has been feeding her some propaganda. So she leaves the Horde and she joins the rebellion along with her two new friends, Glimmer, who glimmers, and Bo, who uses a bow and arrow. They set out to gather some more princesses who used to be in an alliance, but the alliance broke because things didn't go so well. They were losing the war. So Glimmer, Bo, and Adora decide that they should get the princesses all back together. And that's what we do throughout the series is get princesses, fight the Horde, and it all leads up to the final big showdown in the last episode, which is very Catra versus Adora focused because Catra's kind of super upset that Adora left the Horde and left her alone. And so we see kind of her back and forth and her forming or shaping into the villain, and then the princesses and the Horde face off, and they win. The princesses win thanks to teamwork and rainbow magic.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the song literally says we're going to win in the end, so...
Right. Right.
Okay, so you mentioned that, we would get to the original, the 80s. I believe Sam is the only person who has seen the original series, who has, any background with the original. So...
well...
Yes,
kind of.
no.
I have a lot of knowledge about He-Man in general, which She-Ra is a spinoff of, because they rebooted it in the early 2000s, and I really liked that show. So then I kind of fell into a rabbit hole of learning a lot about it. I haven't seen a ton of the old show, but I've seen a little bit.
I think that's more than anyone else, yes?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. For some reason, I was under the impression that you had watched it. It's more that you just know a lot about it.
Oh, I mean, I know a lot about it. So,
So you basically watched it.
yeah, I watched it by reading about it on Wikipedia.
Okay. So then never mind. We've dispensed with that fairly quickly.
Well, I would... The old shows are bad, too. They're just objectively not well animated and toy commercials. So I don't think there's a ton to say about them, really.
Okay. So that's the old show. Let's start then with the place where we always start, which is, did you guys like this show?
I loved it. This is really highly anticipated for me because the showrunner is Noelle Stevenson, who's a comics. I don't know, her background is in comics. She did the webcomic turned graphic novel Nimona. She worked on Lumberjanes, and she's done a whole bunch of other things. So I followed her career for a while. So just by following her on Twitter, I've raised my expectations for this show. And so when it finally came out, I was really excited to watch it. November has been a really hard month. And so before Nicole asked me to be on this podcast, I had already watched the entire show twice. Because it's been one of those ones where it's just like, I'm going to veg out and I'm going to watch a show. And this show just made me feel so good and happy. It's just, I don't know, a fun, lighthearted story. It's about friendship. It's a great cartoon too. It's geared at younger girls. I hope that it's empowering for them, and just seeing like the social media response to that and people watching it and making fan art. The community around it has been really great and just defensive of a joyful cartoon show. So yeah, I don't know. I talked a lot about other people's reactions to the show, but I am very in my feels about this one. And yeah, it just makes me happy.
I have basically the same like lead up expectations to the show because it's a perfect storm of tons of people that I follow on Twitter who all kind of got together to make this show. And it's also like, I super love this universe and this kind of like weird magic and technology and like sword and sorcery, but also very positive kind of setting is the kind of thing that I love a lot. I wouldn't say I loved this show, because I think there was a lot of stuff that I think was sort of a missed opportunity. But in theory, and the fact that it exists, I think is a net positive for the universe, and I will keep watching it no matter what. Probably because I think there's a lot to flesh out in a lot of the characters that I am interested in seeing if they do that or not. Like it hooked me in enough that I will keep watching it for sure.
Not to be super repetitive, but I also was so I don't know if what my plans were for watching, but Noelle Stevenson is somebody I used to read Nimona when it was being published weekly online, so I've been following her for a while too, and I was attracted because I remember She-Ra as being a cartoon that my sister watched, but that I was a little bit too young to be into. So it's always one of those things where I'm like, oh, She-Ra, and it reminds me of my older sister, which I asked her about it today. I was like, did you see they rebooted She-Ra? And she was like, I never watched that. So my memories are faulty, but that's what I equated it to. And I thought it was... I thought it was cute. I thought it was entertaining. I didn't have any, like, really negative reaction to watching it. There's nothing much that I can say in terms of, like, I don't know, negativity there. It didn't hit me quite as hard in the feels home. It was just something simple and entertaining, and there were moments of genuine enjoyment and an amazing voice cast and some things that I thought were really well done, but it's not my favorite thing I've ever watched, and it's not my favorite cartoon I've ever watched, so it was just kind of a generally good experience.
I fucking loved this show. It might be my favorite cartoon I've ever watched.
Wow.
We picked this in part because people on Twitter asked us to. I think Samantha, several like Snark Squad contributors asked us on Twitter to talk about this on the podcast, and we were like, cool, no, we got a blank spot. Let's just do it. Going into it, there was a brief bit of hesitation for me just because I have struggled with cartoons and with children's media in general. I have struggled with things that are targeted at children just because I'm like, this is clearly not for me, and that's fine, but I am not interested in it. I would 100% watch this show again. Like, we finished Dragon Prince, and I was like, yeah, that's a good show. I might rewatch it before the second season just so that I can have a refresher. I will probably I just moved this weekend also while trying to watch all of this show, so that was super fun. But like, you know, in the coming weeks while I'm unpacking, I will probably have this on in the background because it was delightful and fun and just made me so happy. I am really excited to have this conversation, in part because I want to figure out why. Like, I want to figure out what it is about this show that made it so incredibly my jam in a way that some of the other things like Gravity Falls like wasn't. Like that Gravity Falls was something that I could look at and say, this is a good show. I didn't care for it. Like, I don't want to watch that show ever again. Whereas this was like a good show that I'm like, yeah, I want to watch this all the time. I'm so happy when I watch this. So
did you like it better than you like Avatar: The Last Airbender?
No, I did not like it. Okay, so I guess No, I did not like it better than Avatar: The Last Airbender, but I also don't know that that's an entirely fair comparison, just because, like, I don't know, like, after there are 3 seasons of this show, will I like it more? I don't know. Maybe. I could see that being possible. So maybe it's not my favorite character. Avatar: The Last Airbender is pretty freaking great. Even to that comparison, while I think I do love that show a little bit more, I think the pilot for this, I was more invested from episode 1, whereas Avatar, like, I liked it and I was into it, but I didn't like care deeply about all of those characters until I was like a few episodes. It was like a build, whereas with these characters it was almost immediate that I was like, yes, I love you, you're all perfect. So I don't know. I would
say that I felt that way about Bo, Glimmer, and Adora. But then any new character that was introduced, it was harder for me to feel that connected to.
That's interesting.
For me, it's more that it was more of a superficial love here with She-Ra. Like, all of them are really cute. And, like, yeah, I enjoyed, there wasn't any particular characters, except for the villains, obviously, that I was, like, not super, invested in or whatnot, but in a very superficial way. Like, I will die for any of the Avatar, The Last Airbender characters. Like, I love those characters. I think they're so amazing and a little more fleshed out. And again, that might be like a time thing, but I just thought that these characters were a little like, even going back down to the fact that they're all named for the thing that they are, it was just super cute and funny and entertaining, but it a little more superficial to me. So it was just kind of a different experience.
There are 2 characters in the last episode who basically just like step in front of the camera and say, "And we were here the whole time too."
Yeah, I feel like that is how they had to handle the princesses, though. So I don't know. For me, that wasn't a negative at all, because we had to be introduced to all these princesses through mostly 1 episode arcs of, okay, well, we have Mermista. She's the mermaid princess. What problem is she going to have? Oh no, her gate is going to fall. And so we get like an introduction to her powers, and then the characters that we care about developing are Adora, Glimmer, Bo, and then Adora's relationship with Catra. And so I grew really attached, especially to those core 4. And I thought that they, for such a short 10 episodes that were 20-ish minutes each, 20 to 30 minutes each, that they were developed really well. They were all cutesy, yes. Like, Adora has her very good moment where she sees a horse for the first time and freaks out and has the best day of her life. And that's adorable. And Bo has his best friend squad thing. And so there are very genuinely adorable moments. But I think that, like, the way that Glimmer had to grapple with the feelings of being left behind, and Bo going to the prom with someone else and them working through that in their friendship felt like, I don't know, a moment of depth where they could have made these characters even more surface level than that. Or Catra and Adora reconciling their relationship, and Adora realizing that she had a completely different experience growing up in the Horde than Catra did because of differences in the way they were treated. And I think that those things could have been glossed over, or those things could have been unfolded a lot worse or a lot more simplistically, and they weren't.
I think part of what made me like love this show so quickly is that the first episode is in a lot of ways the opposite. It's like it's a response to like all the reasons that I hate anti-hero stories. So like Adora learns in the first episode that this cause that she's devoted her life to is actually really fucking evil. At first, like she has the necessary moment of that can't be, it's the cause I've devoted my entire life to, but like is like confronted with real evidence and then says, wow, I better not like devote my entire life to this. And so I don't know, like in a lot of ways, like Adora she's a proper hero, but she gets this beginning that feels very similar to a lot of anti-hero stories. I don't know if I'm articulating this correctly, but yes. I like having that sort of that moment. I think that is something that's like very specific to like me and my own preferences in media. But I think that is definitely like that's a key early moment that I was like, yes, good.
To that same end, I think that I really struggled with Catra, and I can step back and objectively see that they it's like a good story, and it's a complex one in that they grapple a lot and they go back and forth with Catra and her feelings and, letting Adora get away sometimes, sparing her life, and then, letting her fall to her death another time. And so she's obviously got some very complicated feelings, and I can see where other people might enjoy that, but it's 2018 and I do not want to watch my villains be complicated and struggle with their emotions. Like, no, thank you. And that was true here for me still. I think it was a little different because the relationship between Catra and Adora is important to the story, but at the same time, it wasn't like my favorite part of what I was watching.
Well, I think when you have Catra be the person struggling with how they're feeling, but then you have every other bad guy in the Horde kind of do the same thing, where like Scorpia is not... She doesn't seem evil, so then when she does evil things, it's kind of confusing.
Yeah.
Or like those people in her squad don't seem like the other Horde trainees in her squad are very easy to like convince to be good for a second. And I think that makes the whole Horde seem kind of like ineffective, I guess, and a little bit confusing as to what they are actually doing. At least,
yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah,
it's easy. Like they give a nod to it when Adora's like, "But they've told us all along that the princesses are evil," and you're like, "Okay, I see that." I mean, you're working for something called the Horde, and it's fine. I think it's even called like the Evil Horde or something like that. But you had propaganda; it's a thing.
They
but
live
they don't
in the
really
fright zone though, and they all
yes. You're clearly working for the bad guys, but I'll give you a pass. But they don't really go anywhere else from that. And I think especially when you see them like out and it's like everything is sparkling and glittering and they come with their war machines, you're like, how are you still thinking that you're on the good side? But okay, proceed.
I'm curious, Sam, you might have the best insight of any of us because I didn't do any extra reading. How like black and white was the original She-Ra?
It's like all black and white. Hordak is evil and all the princesses are good, and they like make him look foolish some way every episode and send all of his cronies packing. And they're like, they learn lessons about like self-esteem a lot. I think that's mainly the thing that they do. Like, my power's bad, I think is kind of a common Bo storyline, is he has a bad power and gets kidnapped and he has to learn that like he's useful after all. But the Horde never has any kind of redemption arc or anything like that. It's as straightforward as you could possibly get.
Well, yeah, because you just got to buy the toy.
I will say, speaking of black and white, I think my favorite person who was like shades of gray was probably Entrapta, just because she was just like chaotic. She was just probably the best definition of like chaotic neutral. Like, who's gonna let me experiment? You guys? Cool, I'm there. Like, I thought that was a better exploration of like, not everything is black or white. Some people are just, in the middle. And she was definitely there, and I thought in a more entertaining and satisfying way.
Yeah. I almost thought it was unnecessary to have the moment where she's sad that her friends thought she was dead and left her.
Yeah.
Because maybe she would just want to stay there anyway and play with all the robots.
Yes.
She doesn't need friends. She has Emily.
She builds her own friends.
Another really great thing about Adora that made me love her pretty immediately, besides, being like, oh, I've been working for the evil guy, and then doing an about face. Like, from there, seeing her, like, fish out of water moments, because she had not only been raised by, like, she'd been raised by the Horde, but it was very, like, sheltered, and they're raised as soldiers, so, like, 24/7, like, training, and just, living in this camp or whatnot. So every time, not only with the horse, but she couldn't sleep on her comfortable bed, they had to get her like a camp bed in order so she could sleep at night. Like, those moments I thought were really, really great. And I love fish out of water stories.
There's a really great moment too where they're meeting Glimmer's aunt and like and then like later on she's like, oh, Glimmer's dad was your brother or your husband, whatever. And Bo was like, do you not know what aunt means? And she's like, no, I was just kind of hoping someone someone would explain it. All of the fish out of water stuff was very cute and good.
Mm-hmm. And that is maybe like part of my frustration with how the Horde was portrayed, because she would talk about them like they were so tough, but everybody that you would see there was kind of a big goofball, or like they would screw up all the time. So I kind of wanted to see them push that a little bit harder, where it was like almost two different shows or something, where she's living in sparkly pretty world, but the Horde world was like actually really like Klingon style, super tough, and they were doing all the things that she talked about, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I feel like the Horde as a faceless enemy was like that, especially in the last episode, because they had all their robots, all their tanks, like all this firepower that we never saw beforehand. But all the characters that we know within the Horde are kind of goofy, and then Hordak is this face, I don't know, skull man who's there, and presumably he seems powerful or commanding, but we don't see anyone besides Adora's unit who
the like interns,
is the unusual
the
one.
interns.
Right.
Katja does climb the ranks pretty quickly, but maybe it's because there's 4 people total. Right? In the Horde. That's the Horde. It's like 4 people total.
This is the whole Horde.
I think not to get too dorky about the old show, but there's like this whole extra layer of bad guys in the show that are all in the old show that are incredibly strange, like hairy guys or like leech people and weird people with like antennas that shoot out of their faces. And I think to see some kind of stratification where you have like the old generals of the Horde who are like all the weird bad guys from the original one who are going out and doing the bad stuff, and then maybe you have like the newer recruits who maybe are from the planet and they're not really sure that they should be doing what they're doing, and they're maybe a little bit more easy to convince not to do what they're doing. Would have made me feel like it made more sense for them to be so gullible or corruptible by the good guys.
I think that would be a really interesting thing for the show to explore in later seasons. And I think how they answer that question, and if they answer that question, will decide whether my love for the show like remains as high as it does. Because I feel like we got hints as to how the Horde came to be on this planet. Because Scorpia describes at some point how the Horde landed and then they gave the Black Garnet over to the Horde for some reason. And so then she became part of the Horde. And there seems like there's lore there that could incorporate what you're talking about, Sam, of how they had to have generals beforehand because they conquered enough of the planet to set up this big base and build all this stuff.
Yeah. And I guess in the old show, they're like an intergalactic conquering thing, and I'm not really sure if that is what they are in this one or not. She says they crash landed and their base does look like a big crashed up spaceship, so maybe it is just purposefully left unanswered to be filled in the future, and I'm just thinking too hard about it.
I think it's a good thing to think about, though, because I
just don't know what they do. I don't know what their job is, or who they're like.
Why
they
hate this planet so much?
I don't think they're very good at it, because the princesses don't have any people who live in their kingdoms. It really seems like it's just like 5 people versus 4 people.
So your season 2 wish list is a clearer picture of the social structure.
I want to see, I want to see Grizzlor. I want to see Mantana. I want to see Modula. I want to see all the people I love. But no, I just want to know what their deal is a little bit more. Like, we know pretty well what the princesses' deal is. They're princesses, but I just don't know what's their motivation on the other side. And I think we got that with Shadow Weaver, who I like. I liked Shadow Weaver a lot. She had an interesting arc, and to see what she does now is interesting. And like the hints about her backstory, kind of being a disgraced sorceress on the planet, is interesting. I just kind of want that for everybody. Which, if I may, is also a problem that I had with Nimona, kind of, is that I didn't feel like anybody was really bad in Nimona. And they would make them bad, but then they'd walk it back really quickly, or they'd make them bad, but they like weren't acting under their own. They would make people do bad stuff, but then maybe as the book went on, they weren't as evil anymore, or they would be forgiven, or they would feel bad about it. So by the end of the book, everybody was just kind of like a mushy middle thing that didn't make me feel very strongly one way or the other about anything. And that's how I felt about this too, sort of.
Interesting. So like, Yeah, I can see. It's been a little while since I've read Nimona, but it does seem like Noelle Stevenson has a pattern of being really interested in villains, but doing villains differently than other media. But the way that she does that is trying to make the villains as interesting as the heroes, and then makes it mushier, because sometimes you just need a bad guy that is a bad guy.
Or you need to contrast the mushy villain with an actual villain instead of just have your main villain of your story be basically a good guy.
I think that's super important with stories like this one, that where the good guys are so very, very good. Like they're clear, like they're sparkly, they're very good. And I mean, sometimes they make questionable decisions, but you know, they're princesses and they have all these powers. And if you have like a wishy-washy or a mushy evil villain, it's gonna eventually start looking like bullying, almost. Like, leave them alone. Okay, princesses, they're only 4 people. Just, you know, like.
I liked, though, that to that end about like the princesses it eventually kind of looking like bullying, I did appreciate that they sort of played with that idea to like loosely, and I don't know that it was in quite the same way that we are describing right now, but they did kind of play with that idea in the Princess Prom episode, like that was like this, that was Catra's whole gambit with having her and Scorpia go to the Princess Prom was basically like, they're gonna look like bitches if they try to throw you out of Princess Prom.
I really liked Scorpia, like her backstory as kind of like the black sheep princess who didn't fit in with the rest of them but kind of wanted to, and also had those aspects of a princess where she was super happy and friendly. She just happened to be working for the bad guys.
Yeah, I want to know more about Scorpia and understand why she was exiled, because the obvious answer is that she looks different than the other princesses. They're all like very human, and she has these big old scorpion claws and a tail and things like that.
And if so, then that like greatly taints the pure goodness of the princesses.
Yeah, like if they were mean to her growing up because she looked different, then that is something that can add complexity to these, I don't know, good princesses that aren't always good.
My princess that I'm like, I want to know more of is Mermista, just because she's voiced by Heather
Bella Lavelle.
Yes, from Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. As soon as I heard her voice, I was like, I know that monotone. And I looked it up. And I love that she was like the reluctant hero princess just because of like her delivery and everything. And that they paired her up against Seahawk. And he's like adventure ho, and he's like yelling all over the place. And she's like, yeah, it's cool. Like their dynamic was great. I love that actress. And I mean, she was literally not that important. Like, as she was about as fleshed out as all of the other princesses, which is to say not very much, but she's the one that if they gave me like even less She-Ra and more Mermista, I'd be okay with that.
I actually didn't really I liked Adora so much more than I liked She-Ra. Like, I don't think that they were necessarily separate characters, but there was something kind of boring about whenever she would be She-Ra, I guess. I just wanted her to be back in her cool jacket, maybe. It was mostly what it was.
Well, it seemed like Adora was more human. Like, right. She-Ra was the manifestation of her power, and She-Ra was the person who fought, and then Adora was the one who dealt with the consequences of that, and was the one who actually had to grapple with the idea of saving the world versus saving her friends, and what is her destiny. And I don't know, She-Ra was just the muscle that came out. So that makes sense to me.
Maybe to some degree, it was kind of like she didn't even like being She-Ra that much sometimes. It was just a source of frustration for her for the most part, it seemed like. Especially when she was trying to unravel like the history of what exactly she was supposed to be doing.
Yeah. I think that even from the beginning, it sounded like Adora felt like She-Ra was a different person. And Glimmer and Bo acknowledged that too, because there was that whole episode where Glimmer wanted to introduce Adora to her mom, but she wanted to introduce She-Ra, not Adora. The fact that Adora was a Horde soldier was this whole to-do, and I don't know if the moral of that episode or the ending of that episode was that they are one and the same, or that you can't have one with the other. And maybe that is more it than they are the same person. It's like they're a package deal. If you want the strength of She-Ra, you have to have the heart of Adora. And that's why she's going to be the one to save the world.
Right.
I love that.
We're gonna win in the end.
This song is just so good. I don't skip intros in general, like by and large. Like I almost never skip the intro, but like this intro in particular, more than any intro ever. How can you skip it? Like how? How? You can't. You
To
can't.
my great
It's wrong.
shame. To my great shame, I would run for the remote every time that I was
Oh my God! No.
You were wrong.
Okay,
You
well, I'm
were
sorry.
wrong.
It literally made me want to join a gym just so I could put it on my gym playlist.
I told Sari this is like new race day jam. Like this is
Because you're gonna win in the end, damn it.
I'm sorry for my bad opinion. when I saw you tweet, or you tweeted or something about how could anybody skip this, Nicole, and I was like, oh God, I'm gonna have to admit it when I'm.
you know, it was very brave of you to admit to that.
Yeah, I know.
So I'm super curious, and I'm glad that we have both Sari and Sam on this episode today, because as an animated show, I always try and like look at the animation and decide what's happening. And the thing that's like I think super obvious here is that this is very simply drawn, like with very few lines. It seemed like to me, which is like my best way of communicating that. But I'm curious how you guys felt about the animation in general.
I think it had very excellent character design. That was handled a little bit clumsily maybe when it came to the actual animation of it. I think certain episodes were much better animated than others. Like the ones towards the beginning and the end seemed better animated, and the ones in the middle were a little bit more like noticeably rough. I don't know. It bothered me more than like Voltron bothers me, I guess. And that's another Netflix show that I think is a little bit slicker, but also very simply animated. This one, I think, used less shortcuts than Voltron does, like less static faces with a moving mouth. So it felt a little bit more like alive and chaotic than Voltron did, for better or for worse. I also felt like it seemed a little bit empty. Like I said, they didn't have anybody in their kingdoms really, and I feel like one of the strengths of something like Avatar is it just seems like they're in a country loaded up with people, and that you can see the effects that the bad guys have on things, and it just seemed a little bit like existing in a void to me, I guess.
I agree with that. I really liked the character design, especially, I don't know, most of what I read about the show was people yelling about how they didn't look like the old characters, or people defending the new character design. That was the discourse. But I think the only time that I really noticed the animation was not working for me was with Swiftwind. There was like that episode close to the end where they were trying to draw a horse from different angles, and it just distorted his face like no tomorrow. It was very bizarre.
I felt so bad for the people who had to draw that horse so many times, because drawing a horse is very miserable, and drawing like a Pegasus with multiple people riding on the back of it would not be like a fun couple weeks. But it was an extremely hard task, and so I understand the difficulty in it, but that was the only time where the animation itself pulled me out of the show. I also speak as less of an animator than you, Sam. You have much more experience and knowledge. Emily, the robot, the way her legs worked also bothered me, but it was mostly maybe like four-legged things, or the horse and Emily. Those are the two things that bothered me the most.
So bipedal stuff, fine, but
yes. Four-legged creatures are very hard to draw. But I thought they did some fun stuff with Swiftwind's face. I liked that he came back. I was kind of worried he was never going to come back, and then he came back and he was like a socialist or something, breaking all the horses with their servitude. I thought was a very good angle for a magical talking horse.
It was good too. Just you mentioned I thinking that he weren't sure if he was gonna come back, and I loved all the little meta shit like that too. Like he returns at this moment where you're like, where the fuck is the horse? Like that horse just rode off and he's been gone forever, and then randomly shows up. I don't know. Like just all of the way that they have all of this little subtle nods to just that this is a constructed thing. I loved all of that stuff.
My favorite thing of that is when Kyle and Bo are talking, when Bo is locked up and Bo is convincing Kyle, who's a Horde soldier, to let him out. And he's like, oh, I'll be your friend. And then it cuts away and it's like, oh, this is a very tired kind of thing for Bo to try. And then it cuts back and Kyle's talking about how nobody likes him and that everybody's always rude to him, and Bo's the first person who's ever been kind to him, and Bo is just so bored and waiting for him to be done spilling his guts.
He's like, I'm a prisoner. Like I have to listen
I literally
to you.
have no choice.
Yeah. And then Seahawk shows up and just throws him off a cliff.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I mentioned the Princess Prom episode, and I just as we're talking about animation and stuff, I gotta give a shout out to all the delightful little costumes that the characters are in the Princess Prom episode, because they were all so magical and good.
Yeah, we were talking about, I love the Princess Prom episode too, because I think this is how I phrased it to you, Nicole. It felt like the animators were getting to do fan art of their own characters, where it was like, okay, let's take all these characters who have their stock outfits and make them fancy now. And draw Catra in a nice suit and things like that.
Her suit is so good.
I think I also liked it because the way that you described the backgrounds, Sam, was really interesting. Or I don't know, like the population of the show was really interesting. And the Princess Prom felt like one episode that wasn't empty. Like we finally saw other people that inhabit this world, and they were all there, and like the background characters were consistent. This is a side note, but there were screenshots of this, but Noelle drew in herself, or whoever storyboarded it, animated it. Noelle and her partner are there in the backgrounds, and like their fancy outfits too, and that was just really cute and good. Like, I don't know. The fact that they drew themselves into the show as like a little nod to it's just like the cutest thing you could do if you're going to get engaged to somebody is draw them in the show and be on a fancy date in a princess prom. I don't know. It was like a very cool episode, and not only just because of costumes, but because it felt like here is where the people are. They are dispersed into the world, and then they show up for this event. And if the rest of the world could feel that way too, that would be excellent. And
it was a change up from the formula that they had been doing, where they go to a different kingdom and try to convince somebody to do something. So it was refreshing in that way. And yeah, that was like that was a standout episode. I thought the pilot was excellent, and I think that episode was excellent. And I think that there are little moments of excellence in the rest of it, but those parts are definitely standouts.
Yeah, it was interesting because it was still like that format, because that was where they were trying to recruit the
Frostina or something like that.
Yes, whatever her name is. Yes, like that was there, but that was like the B plot of the episode. So that was it was interesting.
And they fail almost instantly at it.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here honestly thinking about how I really hope that this is an entire world where you land and you're instantly a princess and everybody's just a princess. It's just a world full of princesses.
At the end, when they're all glowing because they're doing their princess powers, and Bo's heart is glowing, I kind of wish maybe that they had addressed that somehow, that just like princess was just a term that they were using for the people that had powers, and he was a princess too, and anybody can be a princess.
Oh. He does have this one line very early on. He says something like, to be honest, I'm like the only not princess here kind of thing. Like he's the only person that's not. But he is. You are a princess, Bo.
Yeah, I agree though. It would have been really great to have addressed that, especially because the show makes several other strides towards, I don't know, inclusivity. So like that would have been a really cool and interesting thing to do, to be open and direct about, yeah, anybody can be a princess. I don't know.
Well, I'm sure we're going to get lots of very touching episodes about every single character, and like the Catra flashback episode. So I look forward to those big character development episodes for everybody.
Yeah. That's the standard season 2. All the characters get their big episode.
Yeah. And I'm sure they'll also do more contrasty episodes. So like so much of this season was introducing us to all the different princesses and showing us the kinds of powers they can have. So we have the elemental princesses, and we have Entrapta with her magic hair, and we have Glimmer with her teleportation and things like that. But within Entrapta's episode, Bo had a little arc with the kitchen staff that showed how normal people within the world could be powerful too, through the power of friendship and cooperation. And then that thread was kind of dropped because the thing that we were most focused on was Adora's powers and the rest of the princesses coming together. So I think it would be interesting to, in addition to seeing more of the world, seeing more of the normal people in the world and how they relate to princesses and how they are fighting against the Horde too, or not, or I don't know, like, yeah, how they fit into this big planet-wide war that's apparently going on.
I liked having Bo do that too. He was very much the I hate to make this comparison because I like Bo and I don't like the character I'm about to compare him to.
Xander.
He was the Xander. I knew where I was going with this. He was the Xander of this little group, but like done in a way that I genuinely appreciated. Like he was sweet, he was earnest in a way that Xander never was, and I think that's like the sort of the fundamental difference is that like Bo is a just deeply earnest character, and I think that is part of what makes it work. And like just really didn't spend a ton of time moping about all the things he can't do. Was just like, yeah, but this is what I can do, and I'm like gonna focus on doing the thing that I can do. And it was really cool to see him get the opportunity to like, you know, to be that rallying force for some like non-powered characters in the world. But I did not even notice until you guys mentioned it how empty the world was. But now I'm like, yeah, it really was.
Well, even like Mermista even mentions it. She says that all of her people fled. So I feel like maybe it was a budgetary thing that they decided that they couldn't have that many background characters. And that's how they chose to.
Listen, they had to dedicate a lot of hours to drawing that horse, so there really wasn't any time left. I was sitting here waiting for my moment to talk to say that Bo was the Xander. So now that's been covered.
You could always say that he was the Sokka. People like Sokka better than they like Xander, right?
Yeah, I don't know why, but it's just the Xander comparison like stuck out to me while I was watching the show. Like the whole, like that was like an immediate comparison. But Sokka is also fair.
Yeah, he has no powers and
he has no yeah,
and a ranged weapon.
I'm trying to decide why it's more Xander than Sokka.
Yeah, I don't have a good explanation, but it feels to me it feels more like Xander than Sokka, but I don't have an actual reason for that other than my feelings.
I'm gonna think on this, and then it'll be a bonus pod episode because I really want to understand why.
I haven't. Okay, so this is me weighing in, not having seen much Buffy at all, like a couple episodes. Does it have to do with the fact that Bo is very encouraging of the gang? Like he's really into the friendship and the Bo, Glimmer, Adora, like best friend squad thing, and so enthusiastic to like invite Seahawk into that and things like that. Whereas Sokka wasn't really about the crew. He was there, and Aang and Katara were important to him, but he was never the binding, like the glue that held them together.
Yeah. So Buffy, this is also kind of like more direct. Like there are points in Buffy where Xander is like rather explicitly referred to as the heart, just like on this show. So I like that's part of it, but I think it is partially because of this thing that you're describing, Sari. It's hard because of my dislike for this for Xander. So I'm like having to like step outside myself a lot to like think through this. But I think like Xander's character was also very invested in the stability of the group, in part because that was like, you know, where he derived meaning, I guess. I don't know, whatever. I'm not going to rant about Xander.
I think that the surrounding details match up a little bit more, which is probably like a you know, pinging in our brains, but it's the guy that doesn't have powers surrounded by the two powerful girls. And I would say that She-Ra's more Buffy-like than, you know, Aang was Buffy-like. So she's like the powerful, almost soldier-like, super strong woman. Then you've got the other best friend who's also a powerful woman. And then there's Xander. And I think that matches up a little bit better with this comparison than it did in Avatar.
Yeah.
There we go. We got there. And also explains why it was like feelings. Like, I don't know, man. Just like, I feel it.
Your brain made all those connections for you.
What a good brain.
Did you wonder every time what Grayskull was at all?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I did. I also forgot about that, but I was like, surely we'll understand that at some point.
Yeah.
But we didn't. Did we? Did we understand that and I missed it?
No. It's very weird. It's like, I don't know if they're planning to spin He-Man off of this, because that is a very He-Man thing. And originally she was spun off of He-Man. So she's He-Man's sister that gets sent to another dimension by somebody for some reason, I don't know why, and raised by the Horde very similarly to this, but she gets her powers from the same magic castle that He-Man gets his powers from, which is Castle Grayskull. So I thought it was very weird that they did not make any effort to explain what that was, and I don't know if they ever will in the future, but that's what that was.
I hope they do.
Yeah.
And that's what Eternia, she kept saying Eternia, and that's the planet that He-Man lives on. So maybe they will. I don't really know.
It felt to me like they were dropping a lot of hints at the lore that hopefully that they follow up on in later seasons.
Yeah.
It almost felt to me like the pacing of Steven Universe, which was really slow for me in the beginning, because like the premise of that show, Steven is half crystal gem, which is this alien race of, I don't know, gems that can take the form of women, and then he's half human, and so there's a lot of lore that goes into the alien half of him and how the crystal gems came to Earth, and the way that overarching world was unfolded was extremely slow. It took seasons before you learned anything about it.
Okay.
And so I don't know, I don't know if that's common in modern cartoons or if that's just the way that they decided to pace this one.
Kind of how Adventure Time did it too. It took like 8 years before you knew anything or everything about the world that they lived in, or that anything had any meaning.
It's kind of fine for now, for here, just because it was like very short episodes in a short season, but also because Adora doesn't know anything yet, and she's just kind of fudging her way through it. And they had another great moment is that she's trying to turn into She-Ra, and she doesn't really understand how to yet, so she keeps saying the Grayskull thing like in different voices, like high, low, and fast, and really earnest, and then like she's so frustrated, so she's fudging her way through it, and it's clear that she doesn't understand what she's doing entirely. Like she knows that she says these words and this happens, but I think that's going to be one of the things that if they don't deliver on in season 2, then it's going to get kind of like, okay, it was fine at first when you were kind of learning what this is, but we want to know more.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially it's in this first season, because this season is about Adora's journey to like, she becomes She-Ra and like, you know, accepts that and figures out what she can even do. Like, what does that mean that she is She-Ra and all of that? So that being the focus of this season means that a lot of this other stuff wasn't super necessary at this point, but also like you can only keep telling the Adora being like, what is She-Ra story for so long before you need to start adding in external details. And like, that's cool for like a season. And now if you're going to keep making this show, more information, please.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's thinking that they want to flesh out the show and, you know, give us a full and complete story and not just like, you know, a more, I don't want to say like children's show because that's a little like demeaning, but you know, like a toy commercial. Like it can just be that. It can just be like, this is what it is. She's
Like
She-Ra and
fluffy and
yeah, it is what it is. Like we're like giving it dimension because we want to know more. Like give us the backstory, show us the pain and the hurt. But it doesn't necessarily have to do that. Like it can keep doing what it's doing and still be a very enjoyable, fluffy, you know, adorable, with some good things to say and a little depth peppered in here and there. But you know, I guess what we're saying is that if it wants to keep our attention,
Right. Well, maybe this is also a side effect. It's a side effect of knowing so much about the people who are producing it, and it just seems like something that like Noelle Stevens would do, is to flesh that kind of thing out more, or that was what she would be interested in to a certain degree.
But I that's an interesting point, though, that you raised. Because, like, I will say that I think part of what I liked about this was that, like, even the episodes where I was a little stressed out and worried for them, it was a fairly low level stress and worry, you know? Like, I liked the fact that this show made me feel good, you know? Like, that is, and that's not all of the media that I enjoy. There are other things. I love lots of shows that, like, definitely make me feel lots of really bad feelings sometimes while I'm watching them. And I still, you know, care about those shows and those characters and whatever. But, like, one of the things that I really liked about this show was that I was just happy. I was happy while I was watching it, and I liked that.
we should never stray from the fact that they're going to win in the end. Like that. That has to be true always.
Yeah, no matter how dire it seems, they're going to be fine. That was like when Entrapta got left behind. I was like, she's not dead. There's no way she's going to be dead in this show.
I actually had to go back and rewind it because it got to the next episode and it got to the boat and they said she was dead and I had totally missed her dying. So I had to go back and find like the very specific few seconds where they showed her supposed death. But yeah, she was not going to die.
Yeah.
Because we're going to win in the end. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the note on which to end this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much to Sari and Sam for joining us. And thank you to all of you for listening. If you would like to share all of your thoughts and feelings about She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, there will be a post dedicated to this episode on SnarkSquad.com. You can also join our community on Patreon at patreon.com/SnarkSquad. We have bonus content and polls about future podcast media, or you can find us on Twitter at @Snark_squad. I am at Sweeney Says.
You can find me at My Name is Marines.
I'm at C.E. Riley.
And I'm at Slam Schultz.
Thank you, as always, to Stefan Shin for the delightful theme music that is playing us out right now, and we will be back in your podcast feed again next week.